Coming up on Talking Points, for more than a week, Syracuse University students have camped out in Crouse-Hinds Hall in protest of administration policy and demanding change. We'll talk to one of their leaders. And Congress elected new leaders today. We'll look at who's in power and what that means to voters. And finally, President Obama wraps up an economic conference in Asia, the surprise deal with China that came out of it. Talking Point starts right now. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Talking Points. I'm Nick Cardona. Our top story tonight, Syracuse University students take on school administrators in a grassroots campaign that has captured campus attention for the last week. Joining me now is Talking Points special contributor Nick Papantonis, who's been on the scene at Crouse-Hinds throughout the protest. All right, so Nick, let's break this down. What's going on and who, what is the general body?
So the General Body SU is a collection of different groups around campus that have come together to force the administration on different policies and issues that have been affecting us over the past couple of semesters. So they have a collective voice that it's basically more transparency. They're asking for different things like disabilities. They're asking for in terms of our investments in fossil fuels. They're also asking for other things such as gender-neutral bathrooms, and the advocacy center is also a big issue there. So it's a bunch of different interests that have come together to kind of give voice to the student body.
All right, well, Nick Papantonis, you'll be joining us in a little bit. We're going to toss now to an interview that we had with Daily Orange contributor Phil Kramer. Here is that interview. Joining me now is Phil Kramer. He's a columnist for the Daily Orange. Phil, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Nick.
All right, so we've been following this movement, the Diversity and Transparency Rally. We've heard a lot of opinions from the Daily Orange and from a lot of different columnists, but what is your opinion of this movement? What have you been following?
I think that when you break it down, it's clear that their plan here falls into three categories. Number one is the purpose. Then they have a strategy, and then their tactics. And I think their tactics is where you kind of fall into questions here, because they have a very strong purpose, which is bringing light to issues that concern marginalized students, is basically what their purpose is. And they've achieved that purpose very well. Their strategy is to sit down, get people's attention. They've done that very well. You can't get people's attention by tapping them on their shoulder anymore. You just can't. And when you do something like this conversation happening proves that people want to hear about this, and they've achieved that goal. Their tactics is where they fall into some trouble, and that's where we question whether they're a trustworthy organization.
Now, do you think, you said the tactics, but what can they do, what in your opinion, can they do better? What can they, how can they achieve their goals better through different tactics?
I think organization is going to be a strong point going forward. I think they've gotten the attention. They've gotten the attention.
Mm-hmm.
Kent has, Chancellor Severard has sat in Crouse-Hinds, figured things out, talked. There's been a dialogue. There's been a discourse. Mm-hmm. They've achieved that. And I think going forward, they need to kind of let up on the radical approach, sort of, which is radical is good in some situations, but I think at this point going forward, you have to let it go, kind of figure out a strategy in an organized way.
Now, in our final 30 seconds, the Chancellor sent out an email last night. What's been your general reaction to that email?
I think that I was surprised really by the amount of interaction that he's had here, and I think it's good, and I think they've really achieved something noble in getting his attention and getting that one-on-one dialogue. Going forward, organization, working with student association in a way that benefits both organizations, administration, students. That's going to be important going forward.
All right, Phil Kramer, thank you so much. You can check out his column on Mondays on the Daily Orange. Thank you so much, Phil.
Thank you, Nick.
All right, great input from Phil Kramer of the Daily Orange. Now, joining me now on our desk, Nick Papantonis is back, and a representative of the General Body, the group organizing the protest, Danielle Reed. Thank you both for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, so Danielle, I want to start with you and kind of get your overall reaction to the Chancellor's email. What was your reaction and the reaction of the General Body in a whole?
My initial reaction from reading the email, not his most recent one from today, but from last night, was surprise and some content, but then again disappointment. I personally asked the Chancellor about 2 Wednesdays ago now, the only time that he has ever sat down with the General Body, if he would acknowledge for the campus community, acknowledge that he is glad that he's, as he says, that students are protesting and truly getting involved in the Syracuse community and fighting for what they believe in. And I said, that sounds great. Would you mind acknowledging that we are here talking about it and also giving us your support if that's true that you do support us. And but unfortunately, it took 2 weeks for us to see that email. And unfortunately, the email didn't truly address the issues, specific commitments that the administration has made in order to move forward with our demands.
All right, so Nick, I want to get, what message is he trying to get across? Is Chancellor Syverud trying to get across with this email? What is the next step for him going forward?
Chancellor Syverud is really, I think, ready to move on to the next phase of negotiations here. I think he's ready to see Crouse-Hinds Hall let go in terms of the sit-in, and he's really ready to sit down in committees, in organized meetings with this group, and say, okay, here's how we can do it without them being in his building 24/7.
Okay, so now I want to bring in, we had a comment from SA, Student Association President Boris Gressley. We're going to put it up on the screen, and I'm going to read it now. The Student Association is not involved in the planning or management of the current protests. However, SA is in no way against these protests. We believe that it is our job to support students' efforts to express their own independent opinions, especially when those opinions demonstrate a vested interest in the betterment of our university. Moving forward, SA will continue to continue looking for ways to work with both the general body and the administration to make sure that forward progress is made at the most effective and timely manner. So Danielle, what is your plan to work? Are you going to work with SA and the graduate student organization in the future? They obviously have written comments about how they necessarily don't agree with everything that you're doing. How are you going to work with them and kind of make sure you're representing the entire university?
So we had a great moment this past Monday, actually. Members of the general body were invited to attend the SA meeting on Monday in Maxwell Auditorium, where we were able to talk about our standpoints on the issues. And yes, there were some who were very supportive and some who were still hesitant just due to, I guess, different reactions about the demands and our tactics and things like that. But throughout our demands, you see that the general body is trying to not only get our needs met by the administration moving forward, but we also want to involve SA and the University Senate going forward. So a lot of our demands do involve inclusion from SA and the administration actually heeding to the decisions made by SA, which means that we're truly trying to empower that organization so that the administration can't overlook such important policies and things that get passed.
So do you think, a lot of critics have said that this, you've said that you represent the entire university. We are SU. That was a lot of the hashtag that was going on. Do you believe this movement represents all students? I mean, people have said that this, there's been columnists, people that said that this movement doesn't necessarily represent them. Mm-hmm. Do you think it represents them at all? And how many people are actually a part? What's the numbers aspect? How many people are a part of this movement?
Well, first off, we coined the term the general body because we believe that everyone, faculty, students, and staff, not just students, should be able to find themselves in this movement, find themselves in this document, in these demands, because we have tried our hardest to make sure that these demands and our movement are speaking to every different identity, person, sexuality, race, gender, etc. On this campus. And so what we've tried to encourage is if you do not see yourself personally in this movement, your issues, your identity, then tell us and submit that through our website, thegeneralbody.org. But in terms of representing the entire student body, we really have talked more about representing at least a portion or a greater majority of the student body, not the entire student body, because that is a very heavy statement. The
one thing that I also want to touch on, and I've noticed it throughout throughout Facebook and following this movement and this protest throughout the last week, there's been a level of disrespect, I think, on both sides. The administration has obviously disrespected your viewpoints, but I also see that the general body is kind of showing. I saw signs of think being chancellor is hard, trying being a victim of sexual assault. I saw that sign right behind, like it was a side shot of the chancellor. Why is that appropriate? Why is that, sharing those signs and sharing this information, why is that appropriate for this organization? Is it something to be proud of?
Well, to speak directly to that sign, I believe that sign is just trying to convey the fact that because there are a lot of people who are feeling very sympathetic, or I have felt very sympathetic for our chancellor because he's new. He's only been here for 10 months. So, maybe he shouldn't be completely held responsible for a lot of these issues. But I don't think anyone should pity him for not addressing the needs of the students, which is his primary, or should be his primary goal as the Chancellor of Syracuse University, to respond to his students and faculty and staff. And so just in particular, speaking to that sign or poster, someone, I guess, who has ever been through that sexual assault experience is saying, hey, yeah, I know he's the chancellor, he has a lot of stress, but hey, I'm a student and this has happened to me, and he's not responding in the way that I need.
Who can talk about it, though? Who's your vision of somebody that can actually talk about it? If the chancellor can't talk about it, who can?
Talk about
sexual assault, talk about these issues, because I mean, it seems like anybody who doesn't, who hasn't gone through this can't talk about it.
No,
is that
no, it's not about who can talk about these issues. It's what can we do to help? How can we be allies? What can we do to improve the experiences that not improve the experiences, but improve what happens after to students like these, and not even just about sexual assault, about students with disabilities, about students who've faced racial discrimination, homophobic slurs. Bringing up Hannah Strong for existence. For example, what happens to these students? What do the students have to look forward after something like this happens? And we don't find that there is anything in place for those things. So that's why we're trying to pass through hate speech and things like that.
All right. Well, Danielle Reed, Nick Papantonis, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. All right. Coming up, midterms are done, and we are well into the lame duck session of Congress before the new class comes in January. But big decisions are still being made that affect voters. We'll break it down.
Learning how to kickflip 6 stairs takes determination. So will getting into college. I've got what it takes. So do you.
Today, about 1 in 5 Americans is living with a disability. Over 50 million people, including many of our friends and neighbors, teachers and co-workers, heroes and leaders. 20 years ago, the Americans with Disabilities Act guaranteed every person the right to live, work, and participate fully in the American experience. We've come a long way since then, and we are committed to making even more progress in the years ahead. Visit disability.gov to see how you can help.
Welcome back. Let's now take a look at what's happening in Congress. Major leadership decisions have been made. What's the new power structure? Joining me now is Mike Riccardi. He is a Talking Points correspondent. Mike, thanks for being here. So, what's going on with these new leadership positions? John McCain, let's talk about him first.
Okay, so John McCain is he's set to become the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, which that means two things. There's the funding side, and then there's also the policy side. On the policy side, he's going to try and use things like nominations and authorizing programs and the budget to be able to get his way with policy through President Obama, who is our commander-in-chief. These are going to include things like the Iraq and Syria policy. He wants ground troops. He wants increased funding for the Free Syrian Army. And so far, he's called the Obama's policy on Iraq and Syria an abysmal failure.
So, turning now to the environment is always a big topic now with climate change, with the climate change debate. James Inhofe is going to be the new chairman of the Environment and Public Works Committee. So what does that mean for the future of climate change legislation?
It's very interesting. This is a direct quote from Mr. Inhofe. God's still up there. The arrogance of people to think that we, human beings, would be able to change what he is doing in the climate is, to me, outrageous. So, you know, this is going to be the leading man on all environmental policy, and he unfortunately does not believe in global warming. But the real question is, how active is he going to be? Because a lot of people are going to say he's going to be really active, which that's something we are going to be expecting from John McCain. And then a lot of people are going to say he's not going to be as active as some other committees may be.
Well, we'll have to follow that.
Yeah.
You know, John McCain, James Inhofe, and now Ted Cruz is also going to be a big member of this new Congress. So, Mike, thanks so much. We're going to pivot now to our lead political correspondent, Alex Amico. He's going to break down the playing field for 2016 because we do love to talk about 2016. So, who's turning to the Democrats first? Who are the front runners?
Well, right now there's a front runner. Hillary Clinton is essentially, if she runs, she's the presumptive nominee. There have been other people who have whose names have come up as a challenger potentially. For example, former Virginia Senator Jim Webb has said that he is seriously considering a 2016 bid. He's an interesting character. He's a little bit more populist than Hillary on some economic issues, but he's a little bit more moderate on other issues. He's a former war hero. He won the Navy Cross, and he was Secretary of the Navy under Ronald Reagan. He would be an interesting he'd be an interesting challenger for her. The most intriguing challenger, I think, potential challenger for Hillary is Bernie Sanders, independent senator from Vermont.
He'll get a lot of those left-wing votes.
Right, exactly. So, and he's actually had a recent development. He just hired a top Democratic operative to help him explore setting up a campaign. So a challenge from the left on Hillary would definitely, it could actually help mollify the liberal voices in the Democratic Party because she'll have to speak to their issues if Bernie Sanders or if Jim Webb starts talking about them.
What about the GOP? Who's I mean, the field is wide open. What do you think? Who's emerging as the front runner there?
So Republicans are going to have a delicate balancing act to walk of trying to get someone who will both rally the base and win independents. They didn't have any sort of setbacks in the midterm elections. Scott Walker of Wisconsin and John Kasich of Ohio, who have both been named as possible candidates, they both won their re-election campaigns. Some of the names that we're hearing right now, Jeb Bush is one of the top targets to run. He said he'll make a decision by the holidays, or by the end of the holidays. He would have some problem getting nominated, I think, because he's a very attractive general election candidate. He speaks fluent Spanish. He could help deliver Florida, which is a big swing state.
But he'll have trouble winning the.
He would have trouble winning the
Republican
nomination
primary.
for a few reasons. He's spoken out in favor of immigration reform. He's actually spoken out in favor of Common Core. But maybe his biggest black eye, so to speak, is there's a tape of him saying in a meeting that he would not rule out raising taxes. And in a Congress where many Republicans have signed Grover Norquist's never raise taxes under any circumstances, that's not what you want when you're trying to become that party's standard bearer.
Well, we'll be following it. Dr. Ben Carson is also entering the field. He already said, so that's going to be an interesting thing to pay attention to as well. Well, Alex Amico, thank you so much. Coming up next, Claire Moran joins me in studio to talk more about the U.S.-China relations at the APEC summit in China. We'll be right back.
Turning a 20-foot wall into a canvas takes vision. So will getting into college. I've got what it takes. So do you.
Today, about 1 in 5 Americans is living with a disability. Over 50 million people, including many of our friends and neighbors, teachers and co-workers, heroes and leaders. 20 years ago, the Americans with Disabilities Act guaranteed every person the right to live, work, and participate fully in the American experience. We've come a long way since then, and we are committed to making even more progress in the years ahead. Visit disability.gov to see how you can help.
All right, welcome back. Now, Claire Moran joins us now in studio to talk more about this APEC summit in China. Claire, a big climate change legislation happened there. What's going on there?
So actually, the U.S. and China, who are two of the biggest global polluters, have agreed to a climate change agreement. So the U.S. would cut its emissions to its 2005 level, 26 to 28% below its 2005 level by the year 2025. And China has agreed to peak its carbon emissions by 2030 and will also aim to get 20% of its energy from zero carbon emission sources by 2030. So it's a big deal in the climate change, and it's bringing it back onto the global radar.
All right, so let's pivot to some awkward moments that happened at this this gathering. I mean, these world leaders don't see each other very often. What are some of the major awkward moments that happened at this APEC summit?
There was a couple. There's some problems because these leaders don't see each other very often, and also there's cultural differences between these different countries. So one big one that was talked about was Vladimir Putin of Russia gave his coat to President Xi Jinping of China's wife. And she kind of put it on for a second. I think we have video of it if we want to show it. But she kind of put it on for a second and then passed it off to an aide and had it on for about a second. And then world media outlets kind of ran away with this and said that he was flirting with her. Someone even called it Coatgate. It's become this huge big deal. There was also a very awkward handshake between the Chinese president and the Japanese president early in the conference. So that was a big deal. Also, President Obama came under a lot of heat because he was chewing gum walking into one of the meetings.
And we have a quote from him as well. Let's play
Yes.
that right now.
A new goal of reducing our net greenhouse gas emissions by 26 to 28% below 2005 levels by the year 2025. This is an ambitious goal, but it is an achievable goal. It will double the pace at which we're reducing carbon pollution in the United States. It puts us on a path to achieving the deep emissions reductions by advanced economies that the scientific community says is necessary to prevent the most catastrophic effects of climate change.
So, after listening to that, I mean, what's next for, you have the G20 summit coming up soon. What's going on, international implications, what's happening next?
Well, the G20 summit is this weekend, so I think world leaders are definitely going to be talking about climate change now that these two big countries have come out about it. Also, the European Union just came out with a deal about climate change, so it's definitely going to be on the table. Also, trade agreements between Asian countries was a big deal this week, so we'll see how that plays out at the G20 summit as well.
So there's some trade deals that were happening as well. Explain what's going on with that.
Well, the U.S. was actually pushing for President Obama to focus on wrapping up the U.S.-China investment treaty, but instead of doing that, President Xi Jinping was focusing more on the Asian nations agreed to start working on a Chinese-backed free trade pact, which was a big deal because they're all going to start working on that together. But the U.S. isn't too happy about that because the U.S. already has what's called the U.S.-led Trans-Pacific Partnership with 12 Asian countries, but China is not included. So China is kind of starting its own thing, and it's kind of a little bit of competition with the U.S., even though this week President Obama was all about cooperation with China. This trade deal, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
What about conflicts in the South China Sea? What's going on in there?
It's very interesting because a lot of that was between Chinese and Japan relationships, and the two leaders actually didn't meet, didn't set up a meeting this week, but they were actually sat next to each other at one of the dinner meetings, and people aren't saying exactly what they talked about, just a broad range of topics. So there wasn't any concrete thing that came out about the South China Sea, but again, that's a major issue going forward to see how they deal with it.
All right, Claire Moran, thank you so much. All right, we will be right back with more from our science correspondent, Sawyer Rosenstein.
That's slow. That's slow. Welcome to my block party. Glad you can make it.
The only triple doubles you get come with fries.
Last time you blocked someone, you were online.
I can do this all day. Your moves are just gay.
Using gay to mean dumb or stupid, not cool.
Not cool.
Not in my house, not anywhere. It's not creative, it's offensive to gay people. And you're better than that.
Learning how to kickflip 6 stairs takes determination. So will getting into college. I've got what it takes. So do you.
sat down with our science correspondent Sawyer Rosenstein about the future of space travel. Here is that interview. And joining me now is Sawyer Rosenstein. He is our science correspondent. Sawyer, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
All right, so let's go over what's going on. What's the latest in our space exploration? There's been a few problems in the last couple of weeks.
Exactly. Yeah. Back on Tuesday, October 28th, NASA has contracts to resupply the International Space Station since we stopped the shuttle back in 2011. One of those resupply missions blew up about 20 seconds after launch. You probably saw the videos and the pictures. It was quite an image, but right now what they believe is the cause is the engines, because those engines were actually modified Soviet-era engines from the 1970s. Not same design, actually built in the 1970s, modified in the 2000s, and launched. They've now said, we're done using those. We're going to some other type. They haven't said which yet, but probably American.
So going forward, what's the future for our, I mean, this doesn't seem too good for us, at least on our end. What's the future for our space exploration?
Well, I think the future of space exploration right now is in commercial hands of companies like, NASA contractors like Orbital, or mainly private companies like Virgin Galactic, which, as you know, also had a disaster back on October 31st on Halloween, where it killed the co-pilot, and the pilot was injured but somehow miraculously survived.
Yeah.
Those are the type of things, as horrible as it is, those are the things that are going to be the future. But of course you hear only about the disasters because, just like with an airplane, you fly on them every day, they don't crash, but sure enough, when it matters, as soon as one goes down, that's when people start caring.
Finally, I mean, when the government reaction, what's been our government's reaction to these disasters?
Well, right now the NTSB and the FAA have been working really closely together, trying to figure out exactly what went on and going from there. There's a Commercial Space Act that was passed in Congress in 2004, renewed in 2012. But we're going to see what they do with that. They're going to have to revisit that and see after this death what the big deal is. Because the one main clause in that I do want to point out before we finish is that it said that all of the passengers know they are responsible if anything goes wrong. And I think that's obviously apparent after the disaster.
All right, Sawyer, well, you'll be following this much more. Thank you so much. Sawyer Rosenstein, our science correspondent. All right, that was Sawyer Rosenstein on the future of space travel. Thank you, Sawyer, for that. Now, finally tonight, before we go, Decision 2014 is over, and Republicans have gained control of the Senate. Mitch McConnell is now in the Senate Majority Leader's office for the first time, a job he has coveted for his entire career. Now, there is just one thing to do, and that is govern. Republicans have blamed Senate Democrats for the past 6 years for not allowing anything to get to the president's desk. The ball is now in the GOP's court. They now have the power to get something done. It is unlikely immigration will pass without the president taking some executive action. It is likely that a vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act will make it to the floor of both houses of Congress. And it is extremely likely that this period we're in right now, this lame duck Congress, will go beyond January 3rd, when the new Congress takes office, and will extend for the last 2 years of the Obama administration. Now, my fear is that this lame duck Congress will manifest itself into a lame duck presidency for the next 2 years. Mitch McConnell in 2011 said these words, quote, "Our top political priority should be to deny President Obama a second term." I asked Senator McConnell one thing: what is your top political priority now? Now that your goal of denying the president a second term has failed and your goal of becoming the majority party has succeeded, I can only hope that President Obama doesn't resign himself to the same political pettiness and say, my top political priority is to deny every piece of legislation you and your party wants to pass. It's time now to act. All we have to do is wait. And that wraps up this week's edition of Talking Points. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to check us out on YouTube and Facebook and our new Twitter handle for more analysis. For all things politics, you've got Talking Points. We'll see you next time.